Hi, welcome back to Joe Blogs. In today's episode, I want to talk to you about what's happening in the Russian economy, and specifically to talk about the energy sector. Now, prior to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Russia was synonymous with oil and gas. It has some of the largest oil and gas reserves out of all countries in the world, and it developed its industry in conjunction with a lot of multinational companies that had gone to Russia and helped it to build a lot of its facilities. And it was exporting huge amounts of natural gas via pipelines directly to Europe. And Europe had built lots of electricity power stations that were fired by natural gas all across the continent as a result of the fact that it could get cheap gas directly from Russia. However, as a result of the invasion of Ukraine, Europe has now turned its back on Russia. And the final piece of the jigsaw was recently announced when Ukraine said that it would not be renewing the $1 billion per year transit deal that it had in place with Russia to allow Russian gas to pass through the country to places like Austria, Hungary and Slovakia that have still been buying Russian gas since the invasion of Ukraine started. And the reason that these countries are still buying Russian gas is that they are landlocked. They're located in the middle of Europe, and therefore it's been most difficult for them to be able to get alternative supplies because they don't have a coastline, and therefore it's not possible for them to set up regasification facilities and simply buy in LNG. But because Ukraine have now said that the pipelines will become redundant, those countries won't be able to access Russian gas, and this is a major problem for Gazprom. Gazprom, prior to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, was the biggest company in Russia. In 2022, it delivered profits of $16 billion. $16 billion is a lot of money. But unfortunately, since the invasion started, that's had a devastating impact on Gazprom. And in 2023, the company reported a loss of $6.9 billion, which represents a swing of almost $23 billion from the profit that it made in the previous year. And in the first 9 months of 2024, the company has reported an additional loss of $3.2 billion. So Gazprom is now being funded by the state because it's still partially state-owned, and so the Kremlin is having to fund these losses. So this is on top of all of the revenue that it's lost. The Kremlin is now having to bail out Gazprom. Now, before we go on any further today, I want to talk to you about today's sponsor, Ground News, that I've been working with for more than 2 years, and who are offering Joe Blogs viewers an exclusive 50% discount on their unlimited Vantage plan, which is what I use. And what's great about Ground News is that they're a news aggregator. They bring together stories from all around the world. So that means that I can access all of this data in one place without spending hours and hours searching around on the web. And if we look at the articles relating to some of today's story, you can see that Ground News pulled together 24 different articles. And what's great about Ground News is it gives you the political bias. It tells you whether those articles lean to the left, to the right, or come from the centre. And that's important to me when I'm trying to be completely unbiased in my reporting. And the great news is that Joe Blogs viewers can get a 50% discount on the Unlimited Vantage plan. And if you've already got one, then why don't you think about gifting one to somebody else this holiday season? And you can access this by clicking in the link in the description below or scanning the QR code on the screen now. But it's not just Gazprom that's suffering as a result of the financial sanctions. The oil companies in Russia are also struggling. This chart shows the movement in the price of ExxonMobil, one of the largest oil companies in the world, over the past 5 years. And what this shows is that since the low point of $30 per share in October 2020, at the low point of the COVID-19 pandemic, the share price for ExxonMobil has increased by around 400%. And if we look at the same data for Shell, another major multinational oil company, you can see that the share price hit a low of around £9.40 in October 2020. But since that time, the share price has increased more than 2.5 times. This chart shows the movement in the share price for Rosneft, which is the state-owned oil company in Russia. And what this shows is that the invasion of Ukraine, which started in February 2022, had a devastating impact on the share price. And today's share price is basically exactly the same as the share price was 5 years ago. So if you'd have invested into Rosneft 5 years ago, you wouldn't actually be making any profit, despite the fact that the oil industry has done very well over that period. This chart shows the movement in the share price for Lukoil, which is one of the largest oil producers in Russia that's independently owned, well, officially independently owned. It was previously owned by the state and then it was listed. And so it's not quite as state-owned as Rosneft. It's got lots of private individual shareholders. And what you can see here is exactly the same profile as we just saw for Rosneft. The invasion of Ukraine had a devastating impact on the share price. It has bounced back as Russia has managed to find alternative markets. However, the share price today is broadly in line with where it was 5 years ago. And this chart shows the movement in the share price for Gazprom, which has been the business that's been most affected by the invasion of Ukraine. And what this shows is that in October 2021, around 4 months before the invasion of Ukraine started, the shares in Gazprom were trading at around 365 rubles each. Today they're trading for less than 120. So clearly things have not been going well for Russian energy businesses. And it's recently been leaked that Russia is considering merging all of these businesses into one giant energy company that potentially would be the second largest oil producer in the world. And in fact, there have been a lot of rumours that Russia is considering nationalising these businesses. So basically cancelling all of the shares that are listed on the Russian stock exchange and just making them all 100% state-owned. Now, in response to that question of whether or not they are intending to nationalise these businesses, the Kremlin has said that it cannot confirm a report on the planned nationalisation of the energy businesses. So they haven't said categorically they're not going to do it. They've said they can't confirm the report that they are going to do it, which I think is slightly different. Now, one of the things I wanted to pick up in this video is what's going to happen in countries like Austria, because it's easy for us to sit here saying, yes, it's the right thing to do to switch off Russian gas, to cut all of the revenue that Russia is earning, and therefore increase the sanctions and hopefully bring some sort of conclusion to the war in Ukraine. It's easy to take that big picture view. But the reality of the situation in Austria is that they've been using lots of Russian gas over the past 50 years to produce electricity. And if it suddenly stops overnight, what's going to happen? Are we going to see blackouts all across Austria? Well, the simple answer to that is no, we are not, because Austria and its businesses have been planning for this event. They've been expecting something like this to happen at some point. And so they've been building up gas supplies and also looking to alternative options in terms of energy. Austrian steelmaker Voestalpine, which is one of the country's largest consumers of gas, has confirmed that it's now sourcing gas directly from various international sources and is also making use of a natural gas storage facility that was built in 2022, which alone will cover its requirements in full for at least the next 4 months. And OMV, which is Austria's largest energy business, recently won a court ruling against Gazprom over the irregular supply of gas, and it was given a $243 million ruling and stated that it seized $243 million worth of Gazprom-supplied gas, which it's now treating as full and final settlement of this ruling. And this chart shows the breakdown of Austrian electricity by energy source in the period between 2015 and 2024. And in terms of the colour coding from top to bottom here, we've got the green section which shows wind generation, the yellow section shows solar generation, the blue section, which is by far the largest, shows hydroelectricity, the red section shows bioenergy, the purple section other fossil fuels, the grey section at the bottom gas, and the black section at the bottom of the first 5 years is coal generation. And what this chart shows is that since 2022, there has been a significant reduction in the amount of gas being used to produce electricity and a large increase in the production of electricity using hydro, wind and solar. And this chart shows the percentage breakdown of electricity produced in Austria in the first 10 months of 2024. And this shows that 68% of all electricity was generated from hydro, 13% from wind, 10% from solar, and the amount being produced by gas, shown by the grey section, is now down to 5%. So Austria has really limited the amount of gas that it needs and therefore put itself in a position where it will be able to cope with the loss of Russian gas. So what's the summary and conclusion today? Well, I wanted to post this video because I think it's easy to forget the impact that the sanctions are having on Russian business. Prior to its invasion of Ukraine, Russia was a major player in oil and gas. it had some of the biggest companies in the world. And those companies were doing very well, their share prices were going up, and so were the profitability. And in 2022, Gazprom, which was the largest supplier of gas globally, and in fact Russia has the largest natural gas reserves out of every country in the world, it's sitting on around 24% of the global supply. It was a growing company that was doing fantastically well, and it returned a profit of $16 billion in 2022. However, immediately following the invasion of Ukraine, Gazprom started to struggle because all of its customers started refusing to take its energy. And in 2023, it posted a loss of $6.9 billion. Now, for most companies, it would be difficult to survive that sort of scale of losses because it's absolutely enormous. But obviously, the Russian state was there to keep it propped up. And in the first 9 months of 2023, those losses have continued. They posted another loss of over $3 billion. So over the last 2 years, Gazprom has lost around $10 billion. So that's a genuine loss. That's a use of cash. And then you have to factor in the fact that it made a $16 billion profit the previous year. So we're looking at a $26 billion total cost here in terms of the impact of the invasion of Ukraine on the Gazprom business. But it isn't just Gazprom that's suffering. As we saw from the share price of the oil companies, they haven't done particularly well either because they faced heavy sanctions. They lost a lot of their customers. They're having to renegotiate and find new markets such as China and India. But a lot of those sales are being agreed at a lower price than they would have been if Russia was still working in the international markets. And the impact on these companies is absolutely huge. And what we've seen in today's video is that Russia is now considering merging all of these businesses together to make one huge entity. And it potentially could be nationalizing all of those companies. And one of the reasons that it would nationalize them is because potentially they're still making losses. And the best way to fund those losses is if you own all of the shares. What you don't want to do is be funding losses for companies that are held by investors, because then the investors are benefiting from all of the state money that's going in to keep those businesses afloat. And the reason that I wanted to highlight this is I think it's easy to forget when you're looking at headlines in the press that Russia is now exporting billions of dollars of oil every single year and it's doing really well and everything's getting back onto an even keel. You have to look at the fine detail, and the details are telling us that things are not going well with these large energy companies. You don't talk about merging huge multinational businesses unless there's a major problem, unless you have to. And you certainly don't talk about nationalizing businesses unless there is a serious issue. The last time that anybody talked about nationalization in the rest of the world was when we had the global financial crisis back in 2008, and a lot of banks and other big companies had to be bailed out. And some of those are still trying to recover from that. And what we're seeing in Russia is a similar situation here with their best companies. These are the jewel in the crown of the Russian businesses. So in terms of what's happening with the rest of the Russian businesses, you can only imagine that there are serious problems happening right now. So I wanted to post this video really to highlight the fact that the sanctions are still having a huge impact on Russia. It's hurting the large Russian businesses. These are the businesses that should be doing really well. They aren't, and Russia is thinking about merging them together, and that tells us that there are serious issues still happening with these companies and the Russian economy right now. So hopefully you've enjoyed today's video, you found it useful, informative and thought-provoking. If you've liked what I've said, then please give me a thumbs up. Thank you for watching this video all the way through to the end, and here's something to put a smile on your face.